Hello! Happy Text Adventure Thursday! How's everybody doing today? First test. Did I unmute myself? PFW Scott just reset for 32 months! Wow, that's a lot of months. All of them worth it, though. Thank you so very much, PFW Scott, and all of you who've been supporting me for many, many, many months now. Medium Night, you finished the reading just in time? Yes! Hive, Secret, Diphthong, Dark of Nate, Leia Sky, Star Pilot 6, JJ Dane, Shiny Marigold. Medium Night, Dark of Nate. I'm Raven Classroom, just reset for 9 months. Yay, first one of these I've been able to, in a while I've been able to make it to. So hello, Amy. Hi, I'm Raven Classroom. Thank you for being here. JJ Dane just hit 32 months. Thank you so much for 32 wonderful months in the Enthusi Army. Dark of Nate didn't nap through this, so I'm okay, I guess. Feathers Flight. I'd forgotten I had this up on a different tab. I was startled when my computer started talking. Hello, I am your computer. Librarian Liz just reset for 32 months. Wonderfully. So excited to talk about a favorite story and a great game. We're doing it in this order so that we have Pleasant King's Quest to wash our brains out. Feathers Flight just reset for 31 months. 31 is a great number of months. Yes, it is, Feathers Flight. Thank you so much. Thor is better than Superman. I returneth from the kitcheneth. Thor is better than Superman, has some strong opinions. Rogan27 just reset for 2 months. Happy Thursday. Hi, welcome back. Dark Nate says, I'm impressed by all the folks that read this in middle or high school. I didn't get to it until college. Derek Lee Ketchum says, hello, Enthusi Amy and Enthusi Army. I love Sharp cheered. Bizone Amy just resubbed. It's been so long since I've been in the live chat in one of your streams. It's so nice to be able to. Found the story accidentally in a short story book I got to review a while ago. Nice to talk about it with y'all. Bizone, everyone. I think stumbling on this story is a wonderful way to find it. Derek Lee Ketchum just got a gift sub from Anonymous to hit 4 months, and we're having a hype train. Oh my god. Leah Sky just resubbed for 15 months. 15 months? Wow, that long? Love this short story. Thank you so much. JJ Dane is throwing a book fair. Please throw some books. Innumerate Bees, Toaster Us, Hacked 1984, Wade Wilson 1983, and Thor is better than Superman. You have 5 amazing names. And I have 5 people I'm very happy to welcome to or back to the Enthusi Army. Toaster Us just hit 3 months. Please enjoy your books. Obscure Diphthong's like, so yeah, I'm like, this is a gothic horror story. Oh, it's about male professionals not listening to women. Oh, it's about depression. Oh yeah, there's that gothic horror again. It's all of that. That's what's so good. Behind the pattern is just more pattern and secret pictures and, y'all. Oh, I love this book so much. Story so much. Lemon Twist is gifting 5 subs to the chat. Prick James. Mathemagics. Josh the Ham 319. Kiefer S.I. Julian Dran. Welcome all of you to the Enthusi Army. That's Dark of Nate's gift subs. My goodness. Feathers Flight is gifting subs. The last of Dark of Nate's was Bahanara. Y'all! Oh my goodness. DJ Regular. Hey! Farless816. Sal the Geek. Aaliyah Regati. Grumpatron 3000. Every class is sending bits. Oh my goodness, y'all. Lemon Twist is giving more subs. Cactus Hugger. Critical Erp. Tenendaz, Erilon, and Jamersion. I think we're gonna hit sub-only chat our way any second now. We are apparently running a hype train. Caper Badger sent 100 bits and says, so this isn't about interior design? We're gonna get into the substance of the book. But I will skip back here for a moment. Mathemagics, I love that name. Thor is better than Superman. Your question is not dumb at all. And interestingly, there's a very interconnected history, literary history in the 1800s and 1900s, and a lot of people commenting on each other. I'm just gonna check my facts before I say this. Dark of Nate's gifts up to Keeper SI! Alright. Now, I'm checking the timeline here. The King is Yellow was a book of short stories first published in 1895, named after a play. Julendron, but the play... let's see. Yes, okay. The King in Yellow was published 3 years after The Yellow Wallpaper. Very interesting. Something in the air. DJ Regular's gift sub just came in. We have 3 minutes left in level 3 of the hype train. Y'all are going faster than I can keep up with. My goodness. I appreciate you all so very much. Yeah, holy moly indeed. Feathers Flight's gift of Farless 816 came in. Hey, Level Wool Kit sends 100 pride bits. Can't give subs this time, but here's some bits to celebrate my first book club. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Every class sent 100 more bits. Sal the Geek has hit 2 months with that gift sub. Heart of Handprints has been here for 32 months. I had never heard of this story until your book club. So excited to talk about it. Oh, that's the best. Maggie May 328 sends 100 bits. Farless needs to dig out their notes. Don't worry, we have a little time. Aaliyah Regati, that's a beautiful name. Dark of an 8 sends 100 gifts. Yes, hype for this very cheerful story. Look, I'm kind of counter-programming the sadness with, you know, a story which can be read as one about escape. There's a lot of ways to read it. Heart of Handprints is throwing a book fair for Boomy B1, S9, Ryan Ironwolf, Sparrowhawk 2378, Blanca Danger, and Raul Consuela. Welcome all of you to or back to the Enthusi Army. Lemon Twist sends 126 bits. Today's VOD Squad currently Just Here for Coffee and Aria Flame. Hi, Just Here for Coffee and Aria Flame. I'm sorry that you couldn't be here for live today, but I hope you enjoyed the VOD, and we'll see you next time. Down Under Dwarf sends 500 Gorgie bits. I'll have to VOD Squad, but have fun, y'all. Thank you, Down Under Dwarf. Lamacoin Misanthropy's just hit 8 months on a 6-month streak. Look at all your beautiful books. Woo! Sub hype. Leia Sky sends 100 bits and says, can we hype train? Yes, we can. Every class sends 100 pride bits. Thank you. Beautiful flag. Marbo 4 has hit 32 months in the Enthusi Army. We have a minute left to finish level 3 in the hype train. Immersion just hit 2 months in these book fairs. JJ Din sends so many beautiful pride bits. Thank you so much. Key Squared says, interesting to think about how those two stories appear in history after the invention of synthetic dyes to make bright colored paper. Gamer Badger 82 cheered, so this isn't about interior design? Starpilot 6 has the info. Some people think King and Yellow drew at least a little inspiration, although I don't know if it was ever confirmed. Some subsequent writers have connected them, though. Hail of Wolves gift subs just bits came in. Cat's Eye says, hey. Hi, Cat's Eye 91. Oh, I have many thoughts, says Dark of Nate. GM for Life is on a 15-month streak. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Enthusi Army. Every class's unicorn bits just came in. Librarian Liz, there are things in that paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Yes, I have many, many thoughts. Heart of Handprints 32 months just came in. All right. We did it! We hit level 2 on that hype train. Thank you so much. Maggie May sent 100 bits. Hunt of Harper says, I have missed the Enthusi Army. I don't know how I'd be getting through without y'all. Look! We got some brain train bits and some bug train bits. Hype is very cheerful story, says Dark of Nate. If I missed anybody's message, an anonymous gifter gave Cat's Eye 91 a sub. Please feel free to deliver. Got some very weird, adorable trains out of today's. Wait, Claire, hey! How you doing, Claire? I've done it once. Want to see if I can do it again. I'm not sure if I'm reading the right thing. Ryan Ironwolf just hit 2 months in that book fair. Oh my goodness. Wait, Claire here sends 100 bits. Let's get to the top hype. Big lovey. Oh, thank you so much. Sparrowhawk just hit 2 months. Let me see those trains. I see some side-eye trains, some brain trains. And Hanara's doing a custom, a beautiful train. Heart of Handprints to Blanca Danger just came in. Everyone's talking about their own personal books to clean your heart out with, or heal it with after the scary stuff. Al Sharp is saving guards for after you finish Absolute Sandman Volume 1. Obsequious Diphthong says, is responding to Mercury 83 saying it'll be why I have my neighbor Totoro ready to go after I watch Grave of the Fireflies again. Lemon Twists of VOD Squad bits just came through. Oh my gosh. Librarian Liz, I usually heal my heart with check, please. Down Under Dwarf bits just came through. Alright. Obsequious Diphthong, honestly not sure if I've read this before. Parts seem familiar, but college was many years ago. Well, no wrong way to re-meet a story. Llamacore Misanthropy sub just came through. Dark of Nate, look at these beautiful frog, cherry, bug, and brain train pieces. JJ Dane, I loved Grave of the Fireflies, but I'm never watching it again. Understandable. Latest Guys Hype Train bits just came in. All right. So we have gathered for another Text Adventure Thursday for the return of Book Club after a couple weeks off. I'm still planning to go forward with Far Sector, but I'm still waiting to see when we have some more information about releases. Oh, nice, Liz. Marb just resubbed for 32 months. You're going to get some rereads because I'm making sure. Oh, Secret Stefan says, yeah, if I have read it before, I was a fairly different person then. Ain't that the truth? About reading books. The person who reads them, it changes as much as the book does. JJ Dane cheered so many bits. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Thor. Mr. Bubbles Snappy is now following. Amazing. All right, so spoilers for a short story. GM for Light just up for 15 months. We are talking today about a short story that was first published in 1892 by author Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It was originally published under her name Charlotte Perkins Stetson, but she remarried. The fact that that first marriage didn't work out might be not unrelated to this story of what it was like to be a lady, especially a lady like she was in the late 1800s in America. PFW Scott cheered, hype, hype! That is why I chose this cover as a fave. Thank you. Claire's bits just came through. My brain list says, yeah, wow, John sucks. So this is a short story published by Charlotte Perkins Gilman in 1892 in a massive in New England magazine or something like that, which was just a giant sort of literary anthology, a mix of fiction and essays and poetry. And it has been reprinted and commented on many, 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 many times in different waves of being discovered and shared in the well over 100 years since its first publication. It has become a tremendously meaningful story. It is considered a landmark in, for some folks, in sort of horror writing and gothic writing. For others in psychological and semi-autobiographical writing. For others in important developments of feminist thought. It is all those things. That's what's so great about it. And it stars an unnamed, which I think is significant and very interesting, female protagonist who is writing a series of entries in a journal or diary about how she's doing. You know? She's on a summer vacation with her man, and things degenerate. She's not feeling well at the beginning, and at the end, she is in a very different place, and we can talk about whether it is a happy ending and what we think the ending means, but we are going to get into details in a story that is notable. Like, it's only something like 6,000 words, but it hits you like a hammer. So if you haven't read it, do yourself a favor, pop on over. The full text is available on Project Gutenberg and various other repositories of public domain works, because it is that old, it's in the public domain. There are LibriVox recordings, I think, free audio versions. And so you can get at this text, and it will not take you long, but it will stick with you maybe for the rest of your life, which is something I love about it. All right. PFW Scott. I read this for the first time because of book club. Chose to read in the middle of the day since I heard it was spooky, thought I'd processed well, and proceeded to not sleep that night anyway. Raven's Burgermaster loses memories of the books you've eaten. I remember the books I've read like I remember the food I've eaten. Nevertheless, they have made me. Dark of Nate says, well, I remembered the plain domestic drama interpretation of this story. So, our narrator, whose been feeling a little out of it. Something feels like it's wrong, and her husband, who's a doctor, thinks she's fine, and they're taking a summer vacation-ish in a weird old house, and she thinks it's cool that it's a weird old house, but he says, no, it's a very normal house. And over time, it's very hard to summarize. She gets very interested in the awful-looking wallpaper of this room, and it becomes clear to us, the reader, that things are changing for her and around her in ways she may or may not be aware of. And she's seeing and responding to things that the people around her are clearly not aware of. And again, very difficult to summarize this story. All right, but Dark of Nate points out, while I remembered the plain domestic drama interpretation of this story, I was struck this time by the potential eldritch horror nature of it. It turns out Lovecraft was indeed a fan of this one for that very reason. Sadly, he also had some similar ideas to Charlotte about race. I'm curious, I have not jumped much into this author's perspectives on race. So that's an area that I haven't dived into. I am, as we've talked about on this stream many times before, Lovecraft was super racist. That's just a fact about Lovecraft. He wrote some very influential things. He had some ideas that gifted a lot of people with ideas later, but he was super racist in a way not unconnected to his works. Macho159 is now following, and it would not surprise me to learn that there will be things in this late 1800s author's thinking that I will not agree with once I do that research, which I haven't done, I freely admit, because there was a... Highlander Plays Games is now following. Thank you! Okay, so there is specifically a set of very important feminist thinkers from the late 1800s and early 1900s for whom we still lean on their ideas about gender, but we reject their ideas about race. There were also a lot of kick-ass black feminist thinkers who you can still look at for both of those things. But, all right. So we can talk about John. Farless has hit it directly on the head. John is the husband in this story. He's always laughing at our protagonist. It's one of the first signs you get that, I think the beautiful character illustration of the husband in this is one of the many things it does so brilliantly. Just some fun times in the country. Everything is fine. Sal the Geek worked on a feature film version of this. Mugheart is now following. Thank you! I was going to lead to, it's been very influential for a lot of writers and thinkers, and it has inspired a ton of adaptations and translations and interpretations and art pieces, theater pieces, movies, music. People keep finding more in this story because it is a brilliant, brilliant story that captures a time and place but speaks to all of us in different ways. Let's see. Maggie May says, this and The Lottery were required reading in high school when you grew up. Henchman, hi. Let's see. Leia Sky says, this has stuck with me since middle school, and that was many moons ago. Meaning of Night says, you never forget the creepiness of this one. Anybody I know who reads the story, you can just say, creeping by the wallpaper, and everyone starts yelling. Haunt of Harper says, I reread this story, and the undertones of the husband really creeped me out more than when I read it when I was younger. Dark of Nate is looking up her record on Wikipedia. That does not super surprise me. Ooh, Corpse Handler's recommending a video essay on H-Bomber Guy about Lovecraft, and where Lovecraft seems to have so many queer fans. So, we're debating John, and that's what I love, because John is so specific, but also so able to be looked at in multiple perspectives. So whether John is benevolent, sinister, a well-meaning but destructive mix of the two, just an outright horrifying gaslighting jerkwad, or a dear befuddled husband who sincerely believes he's doing the best thing for his wife. The story kind of allows for all of those readings without feeling at all contradictory, which I love. Let's see. All right, Thor, gotta sign off so you can read this and not get spoiled. Excellent, excellent. I'm gonna skip back to some of these. JJ and I'd forgotten about the story, then saw the rest cure mentioned on a QI episode and reread it. Shiny Marigold says, John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. Yeah, 5th line in and I'm already thinking, get out, get out, get out! Now, yes, okay. People are sharing a lot of important historical context to me. And, ugh, I love. All right. Where do I want to start with this? Because I love this story so very, very much. Lemon Twist says, I'd not come across it before, and in a way I'm disappointed to not know how my previous self would have read it. Let's start with who read this story for the first time for book club? Triamis for the first time? Corpse Handler for the first time? PFW Scott and Jay Sutton and Saratonia and Lemon Twist and Greething LP and Hail of a Wolf. Ugh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I mean, look, I love talking about books with y'all, but just knowing that these... I am but a host for the virus of these books getting more readers. And it is my biggest happiness. All right. As mentioned before, maybe a first time for you, MC Quest Diphthong. Halo Wolf. Also a second time for this book club. Yay! Read it in high school, Henchman? Yes. If you did encounter it, where did you first encounter it? Aleph, I think you were telling us something about your first encounter with it earlier, so I'm going to scroll back and look. Aleph says, the place I first read it, which is a collection of Victorian and pre-Victorian ghost and spooky stories, not knowing it was any more well-known than any of the others. Most of the others in the collection aren't as well-known. And the pure contrast from most of the other European authors, this says Aleph Shark, who are male in it, they have from all over the world, though, in it, is pretty clear. Interesting. Starblood 6 is a great summary read, John. I mean, I think he did mean well, but you can mean well and still be a condescending jerkwad who fundamentally doesn't respect the feeling and agency of the person you're with. Turns out. Ravensburger Master is nodding and pretending you've read it. The story will be here for you whenever you are ready. I don't want to ruin all of its dynamics for you, but it'll still be a great story whenever you read it. Meaning of Night read it in the sophomore year in high school. Every class read it in college. UNC, woo, required it into the 90s. Key Squared found it on the library shelf as a teen. Was deeply creeped out. And Reese says, high school for me. Green Thing says, wouldn't be surprised if I had to read this in college. I just don't remember. Farless read it last semester in your disability and literature class. Ooh. Maggie May read it in junior high. Julian Drawn says, first read it in 8th or 9th grade English class. All right. Corpse Handler says, my American authors class only covered, of course, male authors. Leia Sky, middle school as a required reading. Librarian Liz read it in high school, in my biographies class, and a few other classes. All right, so those are our first encounters. And we see that was part of your American Short Stories class, section of your American Lit class, who covered many regional and different eras. Henchman says, you could argue that the people who drowned women to see if they were witches meant well. It covers a multitude of sins, doesn't it? Meaning of Night says, we read it out loud in class, which added an extra layer to it as it devolved. Devolved or enhanced? All right, so the broad stories, a surface reading of this text is that our narrator is out in the country and over time seems to kind of lose touch with reality a little bit as she goes from curious about this wallpaper to thinking she can see something else behind it, to thinking that that something behind it is a woman, to ultimately, spoilers again for the end of the story, believing that she is that woman who has now escaped from the paper. In between, she sees many women moving around behind it. But in the end, she believes herself to be transformed or revealed as a creature who has been trapped inside the walls, has escaped them, and is now making her way in a self-soothing action, essentially, around her room. Oh, God, I love this book. Okay, this story. So there's a number of readings to this. One is that a person, in a way that we could discuss and describe in terms of mental health, goes from what seems to be a depressive state, as we might consider it, into, with maybe some anxiety, to starting to have delusions and to believe in the reality of those delusions and to lose touch with reality. And Racy points out, I'm fairly certain our teacher instructed this as a postpartum psychosis point of view. It is significant that she has a small child. She has a baby in the story and has not been experiencing what she considers the proper emotions around it. What's fascinating is that while the terms of discussion for this has changed, when you read it in a modern context, it's strikingly recognizable as what we might talk about as postpartum depression or some very other fairly common elements of mental health. X-Rider read, just we suffer 17 months, boop! And I'm going to try to draw boundaries neatly here. You all know I am a huge advocate for competent, professional, psychological and psychiatric help. I think it is literally life-saving. The right person and the right medications and the right treatments can help you make huge changes in your life, can help you deal with all kinds of brain monkeys that are otherwise, I do not subscribe to the idea that there is something somehow more virtuous in not getting help with those things. But it doesn't mean that all help and the history of attempts to give that help is productive or even innocent, if that makes sense. And that's part of the history of this. And we are about to talk about one of the, thank God, widely disregarded points in the history of the development of those ideas that stands out. And that was the rest cure. So, late 1800s, this story is inspired to a great extent, according to the author, by her own experiences. She commented on the story later. She wrote a piece called Why I Wrote the Yellow Wallpaper, where she comments pretty directly on it. Because and I'm gonna use terms like crazy, but I think it should be clear in context what we are all talking about here. The story faced some criticism, some rejection and some criticism early on as essentially being too scary to publish. Don't want to warp people's minds. I believe it got, Wikipedia says it got rejected by The Atlantic, a respected journal, as being sort of too disturbing. Why would you read that? And faced criticism from folks later saying, this will derange you. And she said, Charlotte Perkins Gilman said, a decade or two later when she was writing about it in her own journal, published journal, not like diary, that she wrote it not to drive people to insanity, but to save them from it. Because she believed that this treatment, this rest cure that was administered to her by a specific, very famous psychological professional who is named in the story, was a real person that attempted to help Charlotte Perkins, at the time Stetson, when she was dealing with what we would probably guess now is postpartum depression, attempted to help her by forbidding her from doing anything or reading or writing or talking to people or going anywhere or doing anything but lie around, and eat a lot of food. So, this was, at the time, like, the rest cure. Honestly, speaking just for me, I can see where some of the ideas in it would make sense, where a person who is, for example, in a wildly stressful set of circumstances, removing that stress from them may be part of what helps them to heal. I have certainly experienced that. I think a lot of people would attest to the sort of, that there's some element of like, okay, if you are dealing with a mountain of stress, removing the stress may be a helpful part of your recovery. But it is mixed in with a lot of very late 19th century ideas about genders, as they considered them then, or as many people considered them then, which was that many people at the time would have told you that there were two genders, and one of them was better at the thinky-think. And the other one was not only not as good at the thinky-think, but could be harmed by it. Could be made too excitable, too off the handle, liable to do things that other people didn't approve of. This led to the idea that rather than saying maybe removing you from it, like some kind of extremely high stakes, super stressful scenario might help you to calm down, but taking your books away will prevent you from having ideas that unsettle you. And the idea that a calmer, quieter wife was a healthier wife. J.J. Dane has some context. Mitchell Weir was a pretty well-respected doctor, first one to describe phantom pain in amputees. Corpse Handler says, we recognize in this era that is basically solitary confinement, which is widely considered, except by some prison advocates, to be extremely psychologically damaging. Liberian Liz says this is also one of the focal points of John, the husband doctor's medical prescriptions and treatments, because he does prescribe things that would be given to hysterical women. Hysteria as a term refers not just to sort of hysterical, that's very funny, but to a school of medical thinking that contemplated what they thought of as specifically female forms of mental illness that centered, depending on how far back you go in history, you get ancient Greeks being like, you got a womb problem and it's making you goofy. And much or all of this is now not well regarded. But the root word persists there of hysterical, hysteria, hysterectomy. You can see the way that their assumptions about anatomy and gender informed some of what they were working on there. We have an Aki! A lurker mod. Yes, Corpse Handler says the roaming womb in ancient Greece. Yes. Woof. Now, of course, those things only make sense from, well, they never made sense, but to the internal kind of false sense that they thought they made is based also on ideas about gender that we, again, do not hold to with modern science. But they inform these experiences in useful ways. Mish Belt says, if anyone is curious about the history of hysteria from a medical standpoint, Sawbones does a pretty good episode about it. That sounds like a good listen. Dragovate says, the Greeks literally believed the womb was a parasite that would eat a woman's brain if she didn't have children. Yeah, sometimes if they thought that your personality was affected by this roaming womb problem and occasionally would prescribe pregnancy to fix it. So, as cures go, Flashwave says a lot of early medicine was nuts, to be fair. Yeah. So we have a real-world psychologist who, while well-respected in many ways, has applied specifically to the author of this story a cure that she became pretty quickly. She attempted to follow her doctor's instructions. She was relatively newly married, had a young baby. This respected dude says, this is what will help you. This is what will help you to feel better and more like yourself. And she can feel herself slipping more and more and more away. And what she said essentially is that except for the final stages of this story, it is what it felt like for her to go through that experience. Eventually, she did not get to the delusions and acceptance of delusions stage. She decided to break from those instructions, see her friends, read and write more than not at all, and gradually was able to recover her sense of normalcy for her. But Alicia Saber says, the Greeks did a lot of cool stuff. They also did a lot of bad stuff. Such is human history. And Minion Knight says, now, we don't have time to unpack all that. A very good quote from here. And Reese, yeah, the connection of terms, this is why it is, in general, an understandable but probably not advisable practice to, if someone seems to be being unreasonable to you, especially if that person is female, to describe them as hysterical is likely to cause them offense. Not everyone, and not all the time, but it's, something to watch out for. Calling a lady hysterical is pretty insulting because you are technically saying you are unreasonable in a specifically lady way. And you can imagine how that doesn't go over well. Starpilot 6 points out, she wasn't possessed by the spirit of a woman in her attic room that we know of. Alright, so the rest cure was real. As I think we're all pretty familiar with, the idea of depression and the difficulty of understanding and communicating it to others and the way that it changes your internal experiences in a way that it's difficult to communicate to others, that's very real. And the story itself is a work of beautiful, beautiful, perfectly expressed fiction, in my opinion. And it begins thus. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate. So what we have immediately is a funny, self-aware, imaginative writer who has someone named John, with whom she is spending the summer away from home in a special place. And there's a mystery about this place. She might be the only one who thinks it's mysterious, but she thinks it's a little mysterious. This interesting, long disused house with some, as we're going to discover, very interesting features. And the next thing, so we'll go through this, not the whole story, but we'll keep going. That would be asking too much of fate. She thinks it'd be neat if there was a ghost, basically. Because, that would be cool, right? Still, I will proudly declare that there is something queer about it. This is, of course, in the late 1890s meaning of queer, but hey, go to town, later interpreters. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? This is rented. And why have stood so long untenanted? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. Which, as I think it was Farless earlier on pointed out, is an absolute bombshell of a sentence that lets you know what you're in for here. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. Now, what's so amazing about this list is that there is nothing... The Ryan Cross Project's now hosting. Thank you! There is nothing wrong with a person who doesn't believe in the supernatural. There is nothing wrong with someone who prefers the tangible and provable to the imaginative. But what we see is John through the eyes of his wife. And as we, the reader, are immediately suspecting, she makes excuses for the way he talks to her and treats her. And the ways he doesn't take seriously what she values and believes. Dark of Night says, so even back then, Airbnbs were cursed. Henchman's out there giving some bad advice. So John is a physician. And perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. So, we have a tension. We have a tension between what she can say to other people and what she can put down on paper. And her own almost unthinking admission that writing down what she really thinks and feels is a great relief to her mind. She doesn't even connect it in the text here to maybe the problem is that I can't talk openly to anyone in my life and they don't take me seriously and I can only be myself and say my truth to a dead piece of paper. Maybe that's part of what's going wrong here, but we, the audience, we're getting it. What I love about this is this story reads as if it is a very modern person trying to put our ideas in the thoughts, like, you know, someone trying to do... When someone criticizes a work for sort of feeling like, oh, that's just what a modern person wishes a woman in the 1890s would have said about themselves. That's all in the text. It is all in the text of this one. It is a beautiful example of the fact that women do not like you minimizing everything about us and controlling every element of our lives, and it does not result in our general health and well-being. People knew. They knew. Some people knew, and they worked very hard to spread the awareness and word of that to other folks. Anyway, I love this story. Lemon Twist says, I was impressed with the writing on the first page, and I have thoughts about John. Ravensburger Master says, I don't believe in the supernatural, and it causes a lot of tension between me and my religious family members. But we can tell that it feels more, it's more than that she thinks it'd be cool if there was a ghost and he doesn't believe in ghosts. He won't hear talk of, he doesn't even, can't, like, it's an interesting, she is self-censoring from even mentioning to him that she thinks haunted houses would be a cool idea. That's how far apart they are. Librarian Liz says, John is patronizing and also treats her like a kid. Later on, we're going to hear that 2 beds and another room if he took another is weird. I assume he means just wanting to be close if he needed to sleep elsewhere, but I did start thinking the relationship was more like him treating her like his daughter, not his wife. Now, that's interesting because what I don't know is exactly how common 2 different beds or separate bedrooms would be. You get a lot of references to separate rooms in older works, but I'm not super clear on whether that should be a red flag about their relationship or just a normal part of the times. Now, or a red flag that is a normal part of the times. There's a lot of things to this relationship. And Library Liz is getting to the room description. The selection of rooms is a big part of the action of this story and the revelation of what's going wrong here. Obscure Sifbang says, because of something about the Project Gutenberg intern, you had the mistaken idea this was a modern writer writing about the 19th century as an allegory, and it colored your mindset. Isn't it so much more wild to think this was actually her writing basically in real time about what the world was like? So, we're getting to the room. Mishbeld has a great note on her writing style. What's interesting about the fact that it's an epistolary narrative, and this is a story made out of physical documents, out of a series of letters usually, or diary entries. But the idea is, it's what we think of when we talk about a found footage film. Like, this is just what got captured on security cameras, or somebody taped themselves on their iPhone, and that should be, everything we see should be some captured within the world of the story document. This is the writing equivalent of that. Captured within the world of the story are these diary entries. You could put this in a video game where you find a series of diary entries and read them in order. That's the kind of narrative we're talking about. A very popular form, comes in and out, but epistolary narrative from Mishbeld is that we're seeing her write in a way that seems, to me, as if she's trying to convince herself that things are okay, and that John's behavior is okay, because of his standing and stature and general nature as a man and her husband. That's one of the things that makes this story so effective and so painful, is that she isn't writing, my jerk husband won't let me talk to my friends. She is writing as a woman who really believes he's trying to do the right thing for her, which he may believe. Who can't admit to herself, or is barely able to admit the merest hint that she thinks maybe this is not how it should go. Librarian Liz says, sorry, I should have prefaced by saying in your experience as a cultural historian, the two beds thing, totally normal for the time. The discussion of the reasoning was weird. So yeah, she makes a lot of excuses in a very recognizable, patterned way. So here's we get to, early on in the story, she says, you see, he does not believe I am sick. And what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? The what is one to do is the big question of this story in some ways. Because one way to read the ending is as an ending of escape. Essentially, if in this world they make the rules and they set the terms and they get to tell you what is or isn't going on with you, leave this world. Go to a different one. Make your own rules. In some ways, it is a sad ending of somebody who is no longer dealing with the rules of our regular world and has entered a different one. But in some ways, it could be read as a cool sort of liberatory, like, she got out. She got out of this trap that she's in. Okay, but we're way ahead of ourselves. Personally, I disagree with her ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? What follows is... God, every line of this is so good. They choose rooms. Every time, everything she has an opinion on or an instinct for, she gets overruled in. Which both works as a series of examples of the way that John disregards her perspectives. She wants the one downstairs with the cool trellis on the window. I think my iPad is trying to wake up. I don't remember saying Siri, but... And, Secret Sibling says, it's such accurate writing, it makes it possible to read it that way, because it isn't so colored by the literary manners of the time. It feels strikingly modern, doesn't it? So, he has a specific idea about the room. And here, I'm actually curious. I want to throw it to viewers, because there are a few different ways to read this, and I think many of them are valid. I tend to think when we get to this room, this specific room at the top of this house, and you have to ask, why are we at the dilapidated country manor? Why not one that someone, like, doesn't have greenhouses falling down? Why has this one been infrequently used? Why is it so cheap as a country estate? Why is this top room so weird? She calls it the nursery. And then she makes a series of guesses and observations about what it's like. Like, it must be a nursery because there's bars on the windows so the babies can't fall out the windows, right? Well, we, the audience, are going, is that the only reason there could be bars on the windows? She says, well, they took all the furniture out of here and left just this giant bed, which is nailed down, I guess, so the kids can't move it. And it's like, is it for the kids? And she says, oh, there's rings and fixtures on the wall, so they must have had exercise equipment in here. And we're going, did they have exercise equipment? And she says, oh, there's like a weird mark on the floor, and someone's been tearing at stuff like that. And we're going, oh, that's interesting. So over the course of this story, I have always tended to read it as, this is a house specifically being used for this purpose that has been repeatedly, and her husband, who is a doctor, has taken her essentially to a one-person institution setting. Because as much as he keeps because he already believes something is very wrong, and essentially makes it come true by confining her to this area, which was already designed for folks much further along in a stage of losing touch with reality. Essentially, every class it's an asylum. I'm seeing a stippling, and someone has been gnawing on the bed. How strange. Now, the truth is that it might be just a slightly creepy house. That might actually have been a nursery. And there is the fact that the ending of the story, when John faints, is it because he truly was not expecting her to reach the point where she's doing what appears to anyone else as a very irrational action of sliding along the floor and tearing all the paper off and all of these out-of-the-ordinary behaviors? Is it because he was expecting that? Because he wasn't expecting that? Because he was hoping it wouldn't go that bad? Because he has absolutely no idea what's going on with her the way he's detached from everything else? How do you read it? P.W. Scott says, oh, right, or there really is a thing in the walls, and the last inhabitant also got possessed / went mad. I mean, it's possible. Darkham Nate says, I was reminded of a line from that Dracula live tweet a while back. I want to turn the concept of empathy into a bat and beat them over the head with it. Ah, there we go. Halo Wolf says, who's to say he fainted? That's an interesting interpretation I hadn't even thought of yet. I also, for the record, I do love imagining her writing down that final entry, because it becomes very much like, did you stop and write in the diary that you're crawling over his body on the floor? Because that's fascinating. Raven's Burgermaster says he fainted because the wallpaper was very expensive. So, essentially, one way to read the choice of the room upstairs is just that it's an example of him ignoring her wishes. And one way is to read it as essentially he has already decided that she needs to be in a room designed for someone, what would at the time be like a one-person mental asylum, and has committed her there without her knowledge or approval, in a way by convincing her by degrees that it was what reasonable to agree to his various requests. Like, oh, it's the sunshine. Oh, this will help you. Baron Grey Wolf, thank you for following. Key Squared says, the attic room also puts me in mind of Jane Eyre. Very similar themes going on there. Fluffy Butt says, the room was designed to confuse us. We are not meant to fully trust the information we're given. It reflects not trusting your own mind. Star Pilot 6 says, look, I'm sure she passes her writing books at some point in her circle. Shiny Marigold points out that she was talking about a well-hidden robe at the end. And at the risk of, we are talking about some very serious subjects, so if you are sensitive on this subject, you might want to know about here. But in terms of the uses of rope and very desperate people, Shiny Marigold says, I don't want to trigger anyone, but I would like her to be more specific about how she fastens herself to the world. It sounds as if she sort of ties it around her waist, but exactly what is she tying it to? It's a great question. And maybe that's not where she ties it. And Reese read it as he just took it as he was so detached and aloof regarding anything about her, the surprise of it all. Now, there's a third possibility. There's one possibility is it is a weird old nursery that just comes off very sinister to her. Second possibility, it is explicitly a room that was designed for or is routinely used for adults who are struggling with mental health issues. The third possibility, and her husband is keeping that from her. The third possibility is that her husband doesn't realize it, but she can see the signs of what it has been used for. And so he did not intentionally put her in that situation, but she finds herself there. And I think all three readings make a certain sense, although I've always read it the second way. That he is worried that letting her know he's putting her in an asylum will make her worse because he's protecting her from the information that he really does believe something is going on with her mind. So it's both... There's both he refuses to believe she does feel bad, and he might already believe that she is worse off than she believes. Both make sense as interpretations, something I love. Maggie May says, it's probably a house people rented to take care of family with issues, and unreliable narrative is a big part of the story. Dark of Nate says, I'm not sure what to make of the fainting. Most analysis of it I could find suggested that it was about her finally being free and able to crawl over him. I think partly it makes it like she's become the ghost in the ghost story, and he's become the person who sees it and faints from shock. Partly it's this sort of, he has power over her and control over her at every phase in the story until she shocks him past the point of consciousness, essentially, with her, either, you could say, descent into this state or escape into this state, depending how you look at it. Heart of Parent Prince, have to head out as I have a meeting for school, but I love hearing all your thoughts on the story. I'm loving your discussion so much. PFW Scott says, it's certainly interesting that all the things she notes early on, torn wallpaper, a rubbed off groove, gnawing on the bed frame, are things she ends up doing herself near the end. Is this a loop? So there we get into the question of, first of all, is it a time loop? Has she already done these things and forgotten? Is it literally a time travel story where she's in the same room where she did those things? Or is it that's where we get at the universality of this story, where a specific thing that happens to Charlotte Perkins Gilman can speak to readers in so many ways. I would say probably especially female readers, but I would imagine a lot of people can relate to different elements of this story for a lot of reasons, of being patronized or restricted or trapped. And in that sense, there's the thing of, if there was a different woman who made those marks before she was here, on some level she is that woman and that woman is her, which is what she decides or realizes by the end. She sees the signs of that woman in this room, and that's literalized as a hidden pattern, pictures of the woman all around the room. This picture that emerges from the room, literally, is a picture she is putting together from her circumstances, from the truths she won't admit to herself because it would upset her husband and herself about this room. Like, someone's been gnawing on the bed frame? That is extreme. But if you already think that your husband will be cold with you for a week if you say, I think haunted houses are cool, you're not going to be like, why are you putting me in the gnawed bed frame room? What's up with that? So even much less can she share this development of what she's seeing in this environment and what it's telling her and the picture it creates. And so in that sense, the woman in the paper, all the women in the paper are her, is us, is the reader, is the protagonist. And by the end, it's literally true in the way of beautiful, beautiful stories. Shiny Marigold says, then again, a man who does not listen to the women in his life will inevitably be unpleasantly surprised by what they do. Lemon Twist is commenting on the rareness of depictions of men fainting. I do think it happens sometimes, but you see it less often or less commented on. Lemon Twist says if a man fainted, perhaps hysteria wasn't after all confined to women. I think part of the point is the same behavior in men and women would be described and thought of differently. It's not like men didn't get depressed, but different explanations were probably offered. There's certainly, I imagine, men were probably subjected to the rest cure as well, but I would be very surprised if it looked the same or happened at the same rates. If Secret Sithbang says, I mean, does he actually put a second bed in the room for himself? I'm kind of confused on that point. By the end, when they've cleared out all of the things except for the bed, I assume a second bed for him might be included there. Lemon Twist has a very interesting story. That reading of her subconsciously knowing recalls my paternal granny being put in a side ward to make space, and promptly dying, apparently. Lemon Twist says when she was a nurse, people were put in a side ward to die, so she did. It's one of those interesting... The connection between mind and body can be surprising in a lot of ways. Librarian Liz actually thought sometimes that it wasn't an empty house, but was actually a private room in an asylum wing. She never leaves the room, really, so how would she know? She does walk in the gardens, and she can see out all 4 windows. But hey, who knows? And Reese says, I don't think she would write it as literal time travel, but either the planting of ideas and or the universality of the character. I'm just allowing for lots of interpretations. Farla says, I liked how the wallpaper was described. Smoldering, unclean yellow. Hail of a Wolf says, was I the only one who thought that the women in the windows were just her reflection? It's an interesting thought, right? She can see her ultimately out of every window. Tarama says, I started to think that this would make a great episode of Twilight Zone, and apparently there's already an episode of Twilight Zone based on this story. Now I have to find that. Yeah, I don't think I've seen that one. Gamer Badger! Miss Speld says, despite her, quote, losing her mind, she has the most control because she chose it on her own volition. Unless you believe that she has been possessed and, you know, it's a very open question whether this is a victorious ending. One potential interpretation is that his recognition that he no longer controls her to the same extent would make him faint. But also, it's her perspective. Does he actually faint, or does she simply say he does as a way of expressing the swap in power dynamics? Flashway points out, don't forget men and soldiers were shot for cowardice if they had mental health issues. It was a time, y'all. Huh? One thing I ran into in reading about this that I really, really loved is the idea of, that in this story, intentionally or not, you can take elements of this story and inform a lot of the thinking and literature that would follow. So, one thing that you might have heard of, a lot of you will have heard of, is the idea of a feminist reading of something. And this is just part of a much broader evolution of the way we talk about stories and talk about literature. And someone else will be able to better define it than I can. But essentially, you can talk about, there's a lot of different ways to talk about a story. You can talk about the events that seem to occur in it, you can talk about the themes that run through it, and you can take different angles, all of which can be true at the same time, of looking at what the story says. And one of the great things about this story, as we're discussing, is it can say a lot of different things. It does a lot of different things at once. But if you wanted to describe a metaphor for saying, here's what it seems to say, and here is what is happening underneath, what better metaphor could you get than, I am staring at this paper, and I believe I have detected a hidden pattern. And I can see what is happening in the hidden pattern underneath it. And it is revealing something. It is telling a story that other people might not have noticed in it. But in this case, if I tell other people what I see in it, they won't believe me. So women not being believed and women not being taken seriously is tied up to this idea of multiple readings, which is all being expressed in a document written by a woman where she at every phase is saying, no one would believe me, no one would believe me. Even the women around her are in league with the men who are telling her what is real and what is important and what she should think and say and do. Librarian Liz says it was a major source of debate whether men could get hysteria without a womb. And it was ultimately linked to traumatic shock rather than biology. So I'm seeing a lot of good debate in the chat. Again, these are serious subjects about whether the narrator or John, or I guess in theory both. Thank you. It's a book fair. Real Cool Guy 69 is throwing a book fair. Infallible Recalls just hit 2 months. And I think it's open to interpretation. I have tended to read the story as both of them still alive at the end. But honestly, you could make a pretty good argument for either one of them no longer inhabiting the mortal coil with the descriptions we get there. The stars are down! Nice name. Welcome to the Enthusi Army. Obsequious Diphthong looking out the window and seeing the women. I feel like she's picturing herself out in all these places she wants to go. But also all those creeping women is certainly pointing to universality. Carol Cat, welcome to the Enthusi Army. Hail of a Wolf says, I also loved the way that the entries in the journal get shorter and less detailed, but more focused on the wallpaper as she feels better. Millennium Lance, welcome to the Enthusi Army. The change in writing style, just in a technical... The way a couple of diary entries paint this incredibly specific, evocative story is just... I just on a writing level, this story is amazing. Dreadlord Herc, welcome to the Enthusi Army. Ozymandias, 8 months. Welcome back to the Enthusi Army. Fluffy Butt's wondering whether people read the yellow wallpaper pattern as a metaphor for the world or the mind or both. Kai Carnage, welcome to the Enthusi Army. Hail of Wolf says, then the last entry's significantly longer now that she is free. A lot of folks pointing out early versions of what we now consider post-traumatic stress disorder referred to as shell shock. Blair Beveridge, welcome to the Enthusi Army again. Gamer Roger says her narrative was so colored, it makes it so hard to know the truth of what was happening, which is so great because you end up, you're so uncertain about the details, but the trajectory and the shape and the feelings are so laser specific. Fubar21, welcome to the Enthusi Army. Thank you so much for throwing books at those new Enthusi Army members. Dargonate says she probably fed John to Cthulhu. Yeah, Yaftang. Lemon Twist says, I suspect my younger self would have read it as a simple ghost story. Thanks so much to the Enthusi Army for broadening my horizon so I could see so much more. Well, I hope we all can do that for each other. And what I like is it works as a simple ghost story. Haunted country mansion, some spooky wallpaper, and a mysterious woman who tempts our narrator across the veil of reality. But it also is a pretty direct attack on bad mental health decisions that make people worse. An attack on not believing women, an attack on not taking female perspectives seriously. And a little story of a marriage going through some troubles. A portrait of postpartum depression. It does all of these different things at once. And Reese says, I genuinely didn't know how to interpret the ending of this when I read it, though I interpreted her freedom being a mental detachment to reality. I do tend to think she may literally, in fact, be pushing herself along the edge of the room and believing that she is fully accepting the delusion that she is a creature who escaped from the wallpaper. So in that end, it's a tragic story. It is a story of what the author is sort of suggesting could be the inevitable outcome of taking away someone's every lifeline to the world. That they will just dwell in a different world suggested to them by their environment, and could ultimately, it seems unlikely that this person she is at the end is going to have a productive relationship with the people around her, or get to have casual conversations with her nice friends that her husband won't let visit, or raise that child, or create creative works, as we know the author of the story does. And so in that sense, it is a tragic ending. She probably does not get to go and have the full, varied life in the world that the narrator at the beginning of this would clearly like to have. She essentially almost begs her husband to just let her have human contact at some point. But you can also read it as a victorious ending. She is trapped in this situation, and she finds a way out where there should have been none. They lock you in a house. She ultimately locks herself in the room. I love the horror movie-esque detail of her just constantly repeating the keys in the garden, until he goes and gets it and lets in. Because her perspective by that point is like, what's he being? Just go get the key. I told you where it is. And you know that he at the outset is like, you've locked yourself in your room. What's happening? But Ebony Taco Cat says, I enjoy the fact that the room was the way it was at the beginning. At least proves that someone likely sees the same thing in the wallpaper and that it's not all in her head. Mishbeld says, I'm curious about the timeline of John fainting and when she wrote the diary entry. How long has John been there? Personally, I'm pretty sure he's dead. Fluffy Butt says, this was a ghost story? I think what's one way to read it is that there really is something haunting that room. Especially since, she starts to see the pattern more clearly at night by moonlight, and it disappears during the day. Darkham Nate says, the happy ending to all of this is that Charlotte eventually divorced her husband, found a new female psychiatrist who advised her to write to deal with her depression, and led a fairly good life after that. I didn't know about the new doctor, but I did know that, she got out of there. Aleph Sharp says, also now that I think about it, the initial description of the wallpaper is described as repeating overall, but changing in different ways when looked at in more detail, such as certain lines within the pattern just trailing off an ending, or returning at a later point, or just circling, being a further point for the repeated experiences and universality of it. More minor details and outcomes nonetheless different. Every class also believes John is dead. Do you think he dropped dead of shock, or that she killed him? Jorgensen says, Dark Mind Duck is not falling. Thank you. Jorgensen says, I should take a second reading of my book of Victorian ghost stories. Lots of ghost stories were written by women. That's an element we haven't talked about in this, which is that Gothic literature and spooky stories were in some ways considered at different places and times uniquely the provenance of women. A lot of them made by women for women. And at least as we learned from the classic Jane Austen satire of Gothic stories, Northanger Abbey, this is where I got some of this context. There were at least points in time where it was considered sort of women and their silly ghost stories that make their imagine all kinds of things. They considered not healthy, virtuous, moralizing literature, but sort of either fluff or trash or actively morally dangerous. There's a lot of back and forth on whether novels are even good for you at all. And obviously some dudes also wrote novels, but it was considered in some ways and sometimes sort of a, trash that women make and consume. Not all ghost stories, obviously not all writers, but there's that element, I think, makes it also particularly interesting that the yellow wallpaper comes off in some ways like beautiful horror fiction or Gothic stories. A character is retreating into in some ways, potentially characteristically, like the domain of women story form to talk about not being taken seriously as a woman. And she's also doing that form, which we all love really well. So there ain't nothing wrong with a good ghost story. BFW Scott says, it definitely came across as a sad ending to me, whether she's subsumed herself in being someone else or has actually been taken over by something else. Gamer Badger 82 was reminded of Kafka's Metamorphosis, which would be written a decade or two after this, I want to say. Shiny Marigold says, it's hard for me not to read this story from a feminist perspective, but I'm trying. Hey, I mean, look, it's a feminist story by a feminist. It's... Ravensburger Master draws an obvious parallel of why it is maybe weird that I chose this story at this time. The narrator was sheltering in place before it was cool. But in some ways, it's interesting because it's a story about being confined and about escape. Obsequious Diphthong points out that the wallpaper is the only source of mental stimulation for her, which I think is why she goes from hating the wallpaper to being obsessed with it. And I found that also in a... I should have written down where I was getting some of these when I was looking into just checking some references and interpretations. But one thing that had never occurred to me on my previous readings is that when they deprive her of literature and conversation, she defaults to attempting to read literally the surroundings around her. Without any books, she finds a story in the paper. She reads a narrative into it. She claws her own meaning out of the absolutely nothing that is around her. And she ends up literally reading the wallpaper for its story. Enrici says, I suppose Charlotte Perkins Gilman could have written it as a, if I did as I was told, this would have been my fate. That is pretty explicitly what she says. She says, essentially, this is where I was going, I'm convinced, had I not turned away from that path. And if anybody reads this and it scares them into turning away from that path, I will have done a good deed in the world. I think that's what she means by, I didn't write this to make people crazy, I wrote it to keep them from going crazy. Again, throwing those words around, but... Obsequious Diphthong says, if there's a ghost here, it's probably a ghost of all the previous inhabitants of the room. Starpellet 6 points out, Gilman also claims that she sent this story to the doctor who prescribed her rest cure. And she ultimately says in that essay that he stopped prescribing it. Apparently there is not evidence for his change of heart. Somebody tried to look into it and see whether he really did adapt. But she says she sent it to him, and I hope he read it. Haley Wolf says, I never got that he refused to listen to her until literally forced to listen and go get the key to get to her. That's interesting. I hadn't actually thought about that. Like, it's the first time in the thing that she says, here's how it's gonna be, and he has to, because he has no choice, accept that. If he wants in that room, he does have to go get the key from under the plantain leaf. And that might be part of why she has to repeat that so many times. Librarian Liz thinks it was a heart attack, running up and down the stairs and unlocking the door, only to find his wife slinking along the floor. Gamer Roger says she could have killed him with the rope in the attic. It sounds like Clue, doesn't it? Starpellet 6 says maybe he didn't die or faint, but there was a struggle, and she just knocked him unconscious without realizing it. It would explain why he fainted right in her path, because he went to where she was already. Triana says, this story has been suggested as an influence on Chambers' The King in Yellow. A very famous story, but not actually one I'm super familiar with. And Reese says, like how Mary Shelley was looked down on for her crazy monster book. Corpse Taylor says, novels were considered garbage that women wrote because men wrote poetry. And, like, essays about virtue. Up until men started writing novels then they were high art. Man, when men do it, it's serious. And it's unfortunate because it's like, no slight on the men who were doing it. You deserve to write novels. I believe you can write novels, I promise. But it will never stop being funny the way different art forms look when different people do them. When women do it, it's handicrafts. When men do it, it's fashion. Flashbot says, in the end of the story, the paper lady said she was free of John and a different name. I interpreted that as either the maid or the sister-in-law. Let's see. I've got out at last in spite of you and Jane. And I've pulled off most of the papers, so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. Yeah, I interpret... I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. Jenny could be a nickname for Jane, or one is the maid and one is the sister-in-law. I'm not sure which way to read that. Bear Drummer says, it seems gatekeeping has been around for, well, a very long time. Hey, Mikey Linsky. Gamer Badger says, the idea that this is a way for a female author to write about gaslighting and the horrific things husbands do to their wives is very scary and dark and real. I can see why people would want to go with the spooky way of reading it. Gothic literature, people being darker, horrible people? Nah, spooky stuff. It's interesting because in that sense, the supernatural reading, you could almost use it to preserve yourself from having to face the very clear, this is what this husband is doing to this wife, and this world is doing to her, and these bad doctors are doing to her. Which is scarier, the supernatural explanation or the non-supernatural explanation? And the truth is that I don't think there's anything wrong with reading it the spooky way because it's fun. But I think the other one is definitely there. Hey, and this is what Miss Speld is saying. I personally interpret this story as both something literal and supernatural. I don't think you need to choose one way or the other. I think it can be both. I think there's definitely a literal story going on, her being trapped in mental illness, but I think there could be an element of the supernatural in it too that exacerbated the literal situation. The stars are down, is now following. Thank you! Same with computer programming, Sister Anderson. PFW Scott says cook versus chef. Too real, says Corpse Handler. Oh, Kaskrashevics. A harrowing story from Kaskrashevics. I once ended up at a school that used legal loopholes to confine misbehaving children or just ones the teachers disliked to one of 3 quiet rooms that were empty and brightly lit. I still hate the colors on those walls many years later. Dark of Nate brought us the Wikipedia quote on the female psychiatrist. Gilman was ultimately proven right in her disdain for the rescuer when she sought a second opinion from May Putnam Jacoby, one of the first female doctors and a strong opponent of this theory, who prescribed a regimen of physical and mental activity that proved a much more successful treatment. PFW Scott says, I thought Jane was the previous narrator and the sister-in-law was Jenny. Ryan Cross Project says, wait, creep over him every time? It sounds like he's there for a while. I think that boy be dead. Star Pilot 6 is on team I think Jane is the narrator, since earlier she'd talked about preventing the woman from getting out and escaping, and by the end she claims she escaped despite herself. Halo Wolf says, my first inclination was Jane was the narrator, but we were never given a name for the child. Perhaps Jane is her baby and it was her family holding her back. Yeah, I guess I always read Jane as the maidservant who's doing the main advice. Says John and Jane would make sense at the beginning of the story as to how regular they are. I don't know if that was yet a trope, John and Jane, CJ and Run, etc., but it would make sense. Because there is, let's see. Got a rope up here that even Jenny did not find. Jenny looked at the wall in amazement. Trying to find Jenny's mentioned a lot. But I can't... I'm trying to find out if she's the sister-in-law or the maid. I'm just getting caught up in the words. It's the strangest yellow, that wallpaper. It makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw. Not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. Gamer Badger, we've been talking about that. Did the repeated bite marks mean she had bitten it before but didn't remember, or that this was a room in an asylum? It's a good question. Librarian Liz. Oh, okay, so maybe I'm wrong here. Sister-in-law acting as the maid and housekeeper, so she's both. I thought they were two different people, but maybe I'm wrong. Marjorie Loves is now following. Thank you, thank you! Ryan Cross Project says, it could be seen from the perspective that Jane is both the narrator and the one going through the story, because there have been times in storytelling the person going through the story is the one telling it from a third-person point of view. So it might be a reach that these are taken from transcripts of diary transposed into a literary form to make more interesting read. Medium Knight says she's both. She says, here comes John's sister. She's a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper and hopes for no better profession. But I feel like she says the maid is taking care of the baby. Let's see. You're probably all right. But I'm trying to think why I constructed it the other way. Because the other thing is, I think, in the old days, people had crazy nicknames. So Jenny and Jane being the same person would not be that strange to me. Mary's taking care of the baby. Okay. All the fancy interpretation stuff I'm fine with, but remembering the names of the characters. It's fortunate Mary's so good with a baby. Such a dear baby. Okay, so either the narrator's Jane or Jenny is also Jane. You may all be right. Just searching the document, we get to the part where her husband calls her little girl. Guys, red flag. Just throwing that out there. Everyone's pointing out that since she says Jenny a million times and Jane only once, it would be odd to use it very consistently, except the last time. Dark Knight says, maybe everyone is Jane, like an RPG. Alright. Well, it sounds like Jane might be the name of the narrator, and I have just always read that differently. I love it. I'm Jane now, and so are you, says Kashmir Zavix. Bear Dorman 1970 is now following. Thank you! Every class says Charlotte Perkins did this on purpose because she's brilliant. Snowflake 87 is now following. Thank you. Olive Sharp cheered. All right, heading out to run a Doctor Who game. The companions have encountered the Ronnies. See all around Bizone. Enjoy King's Quest. Thank you. All right, any final thoughts on the yellow wallpaper? It is one of my favorite stories of all time. The happy ending is Charlotte Perkins Gilman's got out, and we have spent the next 130 years trying to make the world less like this story. The task is ongoing. JJ says one additional thing about the rest cure. There was a corresponding treatment for men, the West cure, also by Weir Mitchell, which involves strenuous physical activity as well as writing about the experience. So the total opposite. Oh boy, I was willing to be generous and think that maybe somehow they tried it, but no, it's even worse. Shiny Marigold, if Jane is the narrator, isn't it interesting that she only names herself at the end of the story? She finally claims her own identity, even if she has to lose her mind to do it, or explicitly reject being that person. Leia Sky cheered! Bye, Amy, you have to play Doctor Who game. Have fun with King's Quest 5. Thank you, bye! Last call, final thoughts for book club. Then we're going to take a break and we're going to play some King's Quest 5. Buffy Beth says, final thoughts, accepted confusion, and take what lessons from it you can. Of Secret Sith, bottom line, if your current mental health regimen isn't working, find a different therapist. Chiramas, then again, those are diary entries. How many times you call yourself by your own name in your diary? Good point. Mishbeld, final thought. Yellow wallpaper is creepy. We didn't even talk about the actual paper. There's so much in this story. Peter W. Scott heading home. Hopefully be back for some of King's Quest 5. Dark of Nate, final thought. I've never liked wallpaper. I prefer paint, but do dislike it to the point of tearing it down. Ryan Cross Brains Project says, I'm all thoughted out. My brain hurts. Lol. Well, we do not prescribe avoiding ever thinking again. Because we are not this guy. Game Roger, always get a ground floor room. Trauma's final thoughts. We should definitely read more short stories in the book club. All right. Thank you all for joining me on this journey. I love this story. We haven't declared our next book yet, Ryan Cross Project. I am looking into one potential option, but it hasn't gotten here yet. And I might try to find something else that's public domain for us in the meantime, since it's not super easy to get a hold of texts right now. But no official next pick for book club. All right. Thank you to Charlotte Perkins Gilman for this awesome story that has had a long and a wonderful legacy. We will get ready for some King's Quest 5 in just a moment. It says you can't have been that bad off if you had the time and leisure to write books back then. I think it's probably a little more complicated than that. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I will be back after a short break, and we're going to play ourselves some King's Quest.